I think your point around knowing what good looks like, particularly when using AI tools, is definitely one that resonates with me. But I think a lot of people have been, let's say, fooled into thinking, that I can just prompt ChatGPT or whatever I'm using with something like act as if you are the world's best insert role, and the output that you will get will then be commensurate with if you actually were talking and dealing with somebody with that level of experience. But I think that hopefully has been debunked at this point. Certainly in my personal experience, that is wildly not true, right? Like I'm not an engineer. I can't evaluate the code that it spits out, but I do know UX, right? And, using Lovable to code a number of prototypes and initiatives recently, I've tried that and put in, act as if you've consumed every piece of information that Nielsen Norman has ever, published, and, that you've worked at a big tech company for 20 years, blah, 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 right? And, it'll give you a decent UX pattern. Often seems to be like whatever Google does, right? For example, which fine, good starting point. But then you get into the details of how does this actually work within the product that I'm building right now, and things start to break down really quickly. So I think it is essential still, at least within it's 2025 in mid-August, right? So we may be wrong next month, but as of right now, at least, I think having real expertise in the middle of those processes is essential if you're actually going to get a good result. But I think they are, to the point of our earlier conversation, accelerating the progress that an individual can make, right? And you hear, Mark Cuban, who I generally think he knows what he's talking about, say, we could have the first trillion-dollar company from a solo founder in his basement. That to me, I would love to know what he knows. That doesn't make any sense to me, based on what I've experienced. But I think that mentality is out there, right? I think a lot of people are saying, I can do this myself. I can make all the decisions. I can, become a prompting hero and, get all of the information and all of the expertise and all of the opinions that I could get from you or me or anybody else that they might need to bring in at $20 a month, right? How, and knowing there will be founders and CEOs, probably who think that, hopefully that will listen to this. How do you dissuade somebody of that viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that that's like a common problem. Like we have a client now that we're kind of working through that with that mentality. A lot of times, like I encourage, like, let's just do it, right? Like if this is like what you believe, usually it's like quick enough that that's what their semblance is. It's like quick enough. It's like, let's just do it, right? And so we'll just pull it up and we'll try to do what we can do and we'll see what comes out. I actually think that like UI UX is a great tool for kind of like showing what happens with AI, right? Mm-hmm. Because like oftentimes when you try to use things like Lovable or, like Claude does a great job of like generating kind of like clickable mockups now. When you show them those, it becomes very apparent very quickly what's wrong with AI, right? When you ask it to do these kinds of things. And it comes down to like, though, it's exactly what you said, like why does it always look like Google, right? Or why does it always look like this? I asked them, I was like, is this really what you want to launch with? Is this like meet your personality? Does this application meet the vibe of like your company? Is this like what you're trying to sell? Would you be proud to show somebody this design? Right. And I'm like, on a prototype level, it's like, yes, right. Absolutely. Like this works. But as far as like like I'm going to launch this product and this product is going to be like meaningful in the market and I can like market it and like people are going to like connect with it and those kinds of things. I just don't think it can get there. Right. And like, that's kind of like what I'm talking about is it's like, it can do an average website. It can make your website look like just like everybody else's. But it's never going to come up with that new UX. It's never going to come up with that new engagement, or at least, not now, right? Like I don't want to like do more future or anything. But so if like you're okay with average, that's what you're going for, great. And I mean, there's totally apps out there that's all they need. But are they going to be $1 trillion company? No, right? That's just not how the market works. I think that that's a misunderstanding of what the user is actually paying for, right? They need it to be easy. They need it to be usable. It needs to be flexible. It needs to meet their needs. And if it's not, then they're going to constantly be complaining that it's not, right? They may still pay you, $10 a month for your app, but they're never going to pay you $100 a month for your app.
Yep.
They're never going to like buy the app for their company at a $20,000 contract or a $200,000 contract, those kinds of things. And so for me, it's like, it's a thing. It's like, well, you can get to prototype level and that's awesome. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. That's amazing. It's black magic, even for somebody in, technology, but there's, it's the 90% problem, right? Like the first 90% is easy and the last 10% is the hard part, right?
Yes. Yep.
So
I think asking, is this what you really want to launch with, as you said, that strikes me as an interesting litmus test almost for kind of the level of sophistication of the company. I think, to your point, probably, a reasonably sophisticated company will look at that and say, no, that's not up to our standards. Let's invest in a better process. It brings to mind to me, though, an anecdote of a enterprise client I'm working with right now who will remain nameless, who got pitched AI application effectively by a consulting company, which also sure will remain nameless. And the executives at this company I work with were very enamored with this, right? It was, wow, we've never seen anything that looks, this good and this functional before. And I looked at this and I said, literally, I'm pretty sure this has been coded and lovable in 5 minutes. And actually the way that if we're able to move past that was me proving it to them, right? I was like, I'll go reproduce this entire thing in my spare time and come back to you tomorrow and effectively hand you the same product. And at that point, it became a bit, different conversation. Then I was like, oh, this is probably too good to be true. It can't actually be as good as they're saying it is. Like, okay, now let's invest in the process to actually make it the way it should be. So it's interesting. I mean, I think there's kind of a sweet spot, right? Where if it's too easy, we can't trust it. If it's too hard, we don't want to do it. And so we have to find kind of what middle ground is. So AI can help you move either direction, I suppose.
And, I think that, we've ran across similar problems too. And it's not bound to engineering, right? I think it's a piece of technology, and technology always ends up really close to engineering first, right? It's kind of the litmus test. We kind of dog food our own things that we make. But we're seeing the AI, that same problem in other spaces. We've had consultants that we try to work for that, a lot of what we do when we do onboarding for other contractors or employees or things like that is just we're almost testing against what they're doing and checking for AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's during the interview process or during that contract process, that's just not the time to really be using AI. It's time for us to be doing the real work ourselves and those kinds of things. And oftentimes we have people that we interact with, and it's just obvious that the document that they produced or the conversation we're having is being generated from AI. And again, it's kind of like that. The litmus test is do you know what good looks like?
Mm-hmm.
Are you giving me an average answer, or are you giving me something that I feel you've thought through and you have your own standards and you understand what's important and those kinds of things? And it's because really what's important when you're hiring is those standards. It's again, if it's a problem of if I could just generate this with AI, why would I hire you?
Right.
Right. And so I'm always surprised when somebody shows up with AI generated stuff. And I'm just what are you doing? I used to do a lot of SEO work early on in my career. There was a point in time to where I was focused on SEO, and we were building a lot of automations around that. And the idea is that we had people doing those things before, right? And when we talked about the automations that we were building, a lot of times those conversations were about perfection, right? That if we're going to automate this process, we should really understand it, and we should perfect it and all of this kind of stuff. And when I was in that situation, I was still kind of developing my understanding of my process. And I was really getting that code smell kind of feel from it, right? To where I was realizing there was something wrong with the conversation. And what I realized is that right now there was a standard that the human process was meeting, right? Or a quality standard. And the conversation we were having was about this perfect quality, this 100% quality, right? And when I thought about it, I was well, there's this gap between where the human process is at and what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I started questioning the folks involved on why are we setting that bar so high, right? What if I could just be 1% better than the current human process? Is that worth the investment, right? And then could we continue to invest until we raise that quality bar to what became too expensive, right? And that's the approach we ended up taking, because it became very clear that we could get return on the investment early on, but if we were trying to perfect it, we were going to spend years debating what perfect looked like, right? And so it was getting them on board with oh yeah, I remember, I really only have to be better than current. Right. And I think that that's where a lot of people get tripped up with AI. If you don't know what that good looks like, right? It ends up being well, this is better than me. Right. And I'm okay, well, that's a buy-in. Right. But is it good enough to be excellent? Is it good enough to be good? Is it good enough to ship? Right. Where's your minimum bar? Right. And is there still a gap? If not, I mean, awesome, go for it. Right.
Yep.
But everybody I've talked to, there's still a gap, right? They're like, well, I couldn't go to production with this today. Here's why. I'm like, awesome. Let's fill that gap. Right. And then let's keep moving that bar up from there. Right. It's that incremental investment. And I think like that's like, agile, the good parts.
Yes.
You want to take that mentality, and that's really what you want to sell, right? Like that's another thing that we run into with founders, especially, is there's this really clear image in their head of what 100% looks like, but they don't know how to get from where they're at to that 100%. And that's a lot of like what we come in and do from a product perspective, right? Is build that roadmap, show them where the gap is, show them how wide the gap is, and then be realistic about how much money, how much time, how many people it's going to take to get there.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. I think at a very fundamental level, you're hitting on something crucial that I feel like most businesses don't know how to address or get wrong, which is just what does the business and the user need, right? And, if you want to put that in metrics terms, is it 1% better, which, to your point, a lot of times it is. Is it 100%? Rarely, right? Like that's usually a aspirational target that you're constantly trying to work towards. But I mean, in my experience, right, other than, engineering uptime, I don't think I've ever hit a metric to, 9 point anything, right? And that's been fine. I've worked at fantastic companies that have generated amazing results and the customers have been very happy with them, right? Knowing, do I actually need 92%, 97%, whatever, right? This is actually, you mentioned KPIs earlier. This is one of the reasons that I'm frankly allergic to them at this point, because it's just so easy to like pluck out a round number and be like, that's our target. And it's really hard to actually do the legwork to figure out, no, it's actually 92.76 is where we break even, right? But that's what you really should be going after at the end of the day. But it's interesting as well. I think that it's another area where, it's kind of a double-edged sword situation. I think a lot of people, companies included, are assuming that because it's AI, because it's a computer, they're not using these words if they're not, super sophisticated, but it must be deterministic and therefore 100% must be immediately achievable. It brings, like, I have a client who's working on embedding a AI chatbot in a very central part of their business to help make financial decisions effectively. And one of the first questions I asked was, how accurate do we expect this chatbot to be? The answer was like a high 80%. I was like, if you hired somebody and they were wrong, they give you bad information 1 out of 8 times, would you keep them? Like, if you start to humanize it in those terms, it's like, no, like, that's not nearly good enough. It's not going to reach 100%. It's only going to reach, 1 out of 8 being wrong. And that's like to answer questions on the homepage of a website. Maybe that's fine, right? To make critical financial decisions that are at the heart of a company. No, pass, right? So it's very interesting. Again, I mean, I feel like all of our conversations is just like there's neither end is good or is good. It's somewhere in the middle. It takes a lot of work to find.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that ends up being tricky, right? Like,
yep.
I definitely meet people that like have like a 0 quality bar, right? Like it was kind of like what you were saying. It's like all I care about is cost and speed. I got to get something to the market. Once we do that, then like I can like go find funding or something like that, or we've cleared our grant funding bar or something like that. And I've definitely met people that like, founders that just like have that perfect image in their head and they are just clawing uphill to try to get to it. And there's things wrong at both ends, just like you're identifying of that. Like if you're striving for the image in your head, then you're probably not listening to your user base, right? If you're down here at the 0 quality bar, your users are your testers. And, like the big mistake that I find down there is like, they do nothing but listen to their users.
Yep.
Right. And you really need to be somewhere in the middle, right? Like you want to listen to the feedback, but it's just like any other like data set. Like it needs to be processed a little bit, like interpreted, or like somebody to read the tea leaves, right? So that you just don't keep chasing user feedback, right? And like that can look like, in listening to like actual user feedback in like a B2C kind of context, but even in like a B2B context, like this idea that like we have these business contracts and in order to maintain them, they like need these features and whatnot, right? Like I've had really bad experiences in those conversations because they come with solutions, right? And like really what we want to do is understand their problems, right? And so even though you don't have that, like, oh, all we do is listen to our B2B partners or what usually, right? Because there's feasibility and it comes down to money, right? Like, is it worth the squeeze? Usually. I do think that there's interesting outcomes in like flipping that script, right? Like being like, I hear you need these things, but like, can you try to tell me a lot about the problem you're trying to solve? Like, what are you facing as an industry, right? And like, that's where the good opportunities come from. Like, because now we're like listening, we're understanding their problems, and we're putting their asks in context. Like, there's been a lot of times where we've exited conversations like that, and the company's like, well, maybe we need to build a tool that solves this problem, right? Like, maybe it's not good enough just to augment our current offering, right? Like, maybe this is a separate product, right? And we've been able to successfully launch products that satisfied the need just not for that business partner, but for everybody in that industry, right? That like level of flexibility, that level of understanding, that not just bowing to the knee-jerk reaction is another huge quality marker of like experienced devs or product people or just folks in general, right? Leadership. So, it's really easy to get into that pattern. And I think like AI, like not to drive it back to AI, but like AI actually makes it a lot easier for us to fall into that trap, because it's very easy to like take that email from the business partner, drop it into AI, be like, help me think this through, right? And then it like, the AI is like, oh, I see that you're like trying to adjust the features to your product, and like it automatically starting to spit out like requirements or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of bypasses that. Are we trying to solve a larger problem here? Or if we do these things, does it really satisfy the problem that the user's having at the other end of this? You know what I mean? And so, me and Lisa talk about the product mindset a lot, and that's really what we're talking about. The ability to reverse those conversations, the ability to not knee-jerk react and instead ask questions and drive the conversation downwards and see if we can't get to the specifics of what like we're trying to get done here and those kinds of things. And then reversing all that information, looking for the opportunities, right? And thinking about it not just in the context of the products we have, but in the larger market and like those kinds of things.
Yep. Yeah. I will certainly say from my personal experience, having worked in a number of environments like this, the absolute most challenging environments, I don't mean that in a good sense, right? To work in, certainly as a product manager, are the ones where every problem over time has been solved immediately. Because you end up with these just, everything is Band-Aids and duct tape and 17 solutions to one core problem, all of which manifest in different places, across the product surface area. Unwinding that is incredibly difficult. And that's just the technical side, right? Just convincing leadership, the CEO, whoever, that needs to be done is a tremendous task in and of itself, right? And one that in some cases I've succeeded at and some I've failed at, frankly. But again, it brings me back to kind of how do you even have those conversations from your perspective with a founder or CEO? You're coming in, obviously there's, an inflection point, probably a challenge, that obviously they wouldn't be talking to you if they didn't feel like they were fully equipped to already solve, but you have to overcome kind of all of this history, right? Of all these decisions that I made brought us to this point. It's probably a very successful company in whatever respect already. My question, to be clear, is more on the human side, right? I think, talking about the process and the tools and all that makes sense, but like, how do you resonate that with the person sitting in front of you and their lived experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like two ways to kind of go about it. And I think it's important to recognize that like kind of like what you're describing too, like it exists in the engineering side too. We call it firefighting, right? And it's like something as like an engineering manager in those kinds of positions that I always keep an eye out for, right? There's two major red flags, right? One is bypass, right? Like we're moving around the normalized process. Why? Right. And the other is firefighting. And the reason why we look at firefighting is because it's almost like a false positive, right? It looks productive, right? And it looks responsive. And, we get immediate feedback from an individualized person that's experiencing the fire, right? So it looks good on paper. But the reality is that the person's been pulled out of the normal flow. Like it's eroded our roadmap. It's a bypass in the way that like everything can become a priority if it's a fire. And so when I start recognizing those kinds of patterns, like it's usually a point in time to where it's like, okay, well, like we need to gather some data, right? Am I just being overly sensitive to this, or is this really like pulling us off schedule? Is it costing us money? How much money is it costing us? Right. And there's a bunch of different solutions to it. Right. I think like that's the other half of this, right? Is that I think that like our generation in general before we raise a problem, we look for a solution. Like we don't ever want to come to the table without a solution. But I actually like usually challenge people in that mindset to be like, what if you came to the table with multiple solutions? Right. What if we didn't go through the filtering process inside ourselves, right? And instead like trying to select the best one. And that's usually one of the bigger unlocks that, when you have to have these kinds of conversations, wins is what I would say. I approach this kind of problem. What I want to do is make sure that I understand the impact clearly. Like, this is consuming one of my resources full time. Are we okay with that? Right? Because that could be the answer, right? Like maybe it's just like fires are going to happen. We need somebody dedicated to fires, right? But I would also say like, look, this is the impact, right? And then like we look at that solution. We say like, if we pulled somebody out permanently, would we backfill that position, right? Now we're talking about money, right? Now they're like, here's our crypto. Or like, could we talk about like, is there a better process, right? To where like we collect these kinds of issues and we look at them more holistically and we put them through like our normal process of like, how are we going to adjust the product so these fires don't keep starting, right? It's like when you got like the electrical wiring pulled out of like a socket or something and it's like barely held together and it like keeps sparking and starting the fire if all you do is come along and put out the fire.
Yep.
And so you have to drive the conversation back to what's meaningful to the person, right? It's like kind of back to that iron triangle. Like if you're telling me that, like I'm constantly talking to my CEO's like, we've really got to drive costs down. We've really got to drive costs down. That's like all he's talking to me about. Then when I come back and I go like, hey, this firefighting is like killing us, right? Like I'm going to be like, it's killing us at this cost, right? And now all of a sudden I'm talking a language that they care about, right? Like if quality is what they're struggling against, like we keep producing more and more product, but it's not meeting the quality bar. I'm going to be like, well, part of it is like half the team's constantly distracted, right? So we're not getting that good feedback loop with like product, or they're not taking the extra time that they need to engage to like with the requirements and those kinds of things, right? And I would say like, like that happens on the producting level, right? Like oftentimes important steps are skipped inside of the producting process, for cost and speed, right? Like, oh, we don't have time to go talk to the users. Oh, we don't have time to deep dive on this section of the application because it really doesn't drive our revenue, right? Like there's these problems at that level too that like distract, right? And I think that like as the keepers of good, it's being the ones that are like in control of those levers that are the standards. We have to have that intimate kind of like knowledge of like what's important to the business, right? And that's one of the key things we do at the leadership level as fractionals, right? Is we help the leadership start writing down and like codifying like their goals, their roadmaps, their plans in a way that they feel like it's clear. They feel like there's a place where they can adjust that scope and plan on a level to where like other people can reference it so that they're not constantly having to go up to leadership and be like, what do we think about this? And it's like, well, we already think about it this way, right? And you guys can go ahead and just apply that to your question, right?
Yep.
And, a lot of people think that, again, that's like rigidity, but at the same time, it's actually like a secret unlock in the fact that it allows people to make decisions without them, right? It stops that kind of like push upwards to where like we've come up with an idea and it's got to go up the chain and everybody's got to sign off and whatever.
Yep.
Like we can just see that it aligns like with our goals, with our plans, with our roadmaps, right? So yeah, so I think that it has to come from both directions. Upwards, it's all about making sure you're relating it to the company's goals, like that you do understand like what we're trying to do right now as far as like you're complaining to me about quality, and quality is just not a high priority for us right now. We're trying to get to market or something like that.
Yep.
And then downwards, I think that you shouldn't skip steps, right? Like if you truly believe something is like core to the way that you're operating, you should write it down. You should make sure that it's being communicated to your leadership. You should make sure that they're making decisions based on it, and all those kinds of things. And usually, a lot of people think that like, oh, well, I could write all that down and then like my leadership's going to just go do whatever they want anyways. And I would be like, right people, right seats. Like, are you sure? Like the point is to row together, right? That's when a business is truly like a well-oiled machine is it feels like everybody's pulling in the same direction. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
I think
directions.
Yes. I think your original point there, finding out what language your CEO is speaking, what they care about, like definitely spot on in my experience. The other angle that I've personally seen some success is talking about retention of talent. I think that's something that's hiring is obviously very hard, as every founder, CEO, recruiter included knows, right? And I think the dynamic that you often get in those firefighting environments that you're speaking about is the people who are good at picking up the fire extinguisher and putting the fire out get a lot of praise and a lot of reward. And the people who are sitting in the corner saying, hey, can we turn the power off for a minute so I can fix this properly, get really frustrated because nobody ever wants to do that. And so you actually end up losing the people who are there to fix the foundational problem, elevating the people who are reactionary. And I think if you can paint that picture, at least, and maybe some examples of what may or may not be happening, right, in the person's company, right? I think that is something that I think resonates with a lot of founders and CEOs, because the last thing that they want is a hyper-reactionary company. If you can put it in those terms of every decision's going to have to go up to you, every decision's going to be very costly, you're not going to be able to compete with your peers, et cetera. So I think a lot more that we could get into, but I really appreciate your time. I think we've had a wonderful conversation here, and we'll have to do a part 2 sometime. But Chris, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great.
Awesome.